This meeting is being held electronically to protect public health and safety due to the COVID-19 virus and to comply with orders issued by the governor, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, and/or the Washtenaw County Health Department. We intend to conduct this meeting similarly to an in-person meeting, but please be patient as there are occasionally technical issues that persist even 19 months into this. To speak during public comment opportunities, you'll be able to speak through the webinar link or by phone, depending on your method of access and the devices that you have available to you. Both the telephone number and the web link are available on the public agenda, which is in the public notices section of the city website. For phone access tonight, you can please dial 877-853-5247 and then enter the meeting ID, which is 977-6634-1226. This information is also available on the published agenda. It's on the broadcast of this meeting on CTN channel 16, AT&T channel 99, and it's online at a2gov.org/watchctn, where you would select the government channel. Mr. Leonard, can we please have a roll call?
Of course. Commissioner Mills.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Sauvé. Commissioner Abrams.
Here from Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Dish.
Here in Ann Arbor.
Commissioner Lee. Commissioner Clark.
Sorta.
Very faintly, but I did. Did you say from Ann Arbor? And Commissioner Weich.
Here in Ann Arbor.
We have a quorum of with 7 members. Just a reminder to petitioners and the Planning Commission, it takes 6 affirmative votes to affirmatively advance a petition.
Very good. Thank you. Item 3 is approval of the agenda. May I have a motion to approve the agenda? Moved by Commissioner Weich, seconded by Commissioner Abrams, and I see Mr. Leonard's hand because we don't have minutes, right?
That's correct. I would ask that you remove that. My apologies. That'll be forwarded on the next agenda.
Okay, so that would be striking agenda item 4. Any other changes or discussion of the agenda? All those in favor of the motion with that amendment, please raise a hand or say yes. That is all the hands. So it carries. Item 5 now is the reports from city administration, city council, the planning manager, planning commission officers and committees, and any written communications. Councilmember Dish, do you have a report for us tonight?
I don't think that there was anything that happened last night that would interest you, although you might be pleased to hear that we had a first reading on energy benchmarking, which, though not our primary responsibility here on planning, is clearly something that we care about. I'm happy to be corrected by Mr. Leonard.
Mr. Leonard, you're up. You can either fill in the blanks or add anything of your own.
I would never correct, only augment. A couple of quick notes. You might notice like an absence of our agenda. Previously, the Planning Commission had postponed 336 South Ashley, a site plan. This was a designated consumption facility that was proposing an addition. They have withdrawn that petition and therefore it has vanished from this evening's agenda correspondingly. I shared with the commission, and it has also been attached in additional communications for public review. I have shared a report, as I promised, of recent variance applications specifically regarding electric vehicle parking. If you have any additional questions on that, please don't hesitate to follow up with me, but I try to put together what I thought would be the helpful details for your information. Thank you, Commissioner Mills, for helping me to make sure I was doing so. And then finally, in our working session next week is anticipated for a pre-PUD petition meeting for 1855 to 1875 North Maple. This is a proposed residential development being conceptualized for the southwest corner of North Maple and M14. So again, that'll be a pre-petition submission for that proposal, and that's all I have.
Very good. Are there any other commissioner officers or committee liaisons that have anything to report? I wanted to note that the ORC did meet last week. We discussed TC1 rezoning and kind of the communication plan for those folks that are kind of within the footprint and then within 1,000 feet. And just so you know, and unless the plan has changed, during our work session in November, the plan is to have that as a public meeting and invite folks who have questions. That way we can all hear it, kind of what the questions and comments are associated with it. It won't be the public hearing. We'll still have a formal public hearing at a meeting where we vote, but this will be an opportunity for those folks kind of in that area or any others. So if you're interested, it's the meeting in November, the November work session. Okay, so the second Tuesday in November. We discussed kind of the plan for that and the communications associated with that, and also potential changes that could happen in parallel, the kind of height discussion and the distance for associated with the TC1 district when we were talking about the highest, that's currently 1,000-foot setback. So there was some discussion of that, and I'm expecting that that will kind of continue on. And then we also discussed Mr. Leonard brought some good maps and data associated with nonconformities in R2A districts. And so hopefully we'll see some relatively simple text changes to that going forward. Is that a fair assumption? Okay. Anybody else? Okie dokie, on to number 6, which is audience participation. This is the next on our agenda is an opportunity for public comment. It's an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about an issue that's not listed as a public hearing on this agenda. So tonight we have dedicated public hearings on site plan review thresholds and for the 3874 Research Park Drive proposal. If you wish to address the Planning Commission on any other matters, now is an appropriate time for that. To speak, please press *9 if you're listening by phone, or if you've joined us through the web link, you can use the raised hand feature that's at the bottom of the screen. If you're watching us right now and would like to dial in, the phone number is 877-853-5247, and our meeting ID is 977-6634-1226. Mr. Leonard will call on those who've raised their hand. And again, if you've dialed in, you press *9. If you're here watching us through Zoom, use the raise hand feature. He'll call on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number or your name, whatever, depending on how you've joined. And when, once you've unmuted, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we can hear you more clearly. Please also state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
Caller with the phone number ending with 955. Caller with the phone number ending with 955. You can press *6 to unmute your phone and address the commission for up to 3 minutes.
Good evening, commissioners. It's Kirk Westfall, 3505 Charter Place. Just a couple of brief comments. I am enthusiastically awaiting further action on eliminating parking minimums. I think particularly in light of some of the reports we've gotten about severity of climate change and the fact that we're still insisting on all developments to be accompanied by, in most of the city, to be accompanied by parking, I think is something that should be assessed very soon. The other issue is thinking about what's going to happen on corridors during the TC1 rezoning process, which could be somewhat lengthy. and just what the philosophy is on development proposals that come in that are in opposition to what these parcels are going to be rezoned to. I know it's a fairly common practice to do something like a moratorium if something is designated for rezoning and there's that awkward interim time where you don't want bad development to happen before the good zoning gets put in place. I don't know if that's feasible on such a wide area for such a long period of time. So I'm wondering if there's any other creative ways around, tapping the brakes on bad development while we rezone for good development. And I think one idea could be looking at citywide commercial parking maximums, either from a form-based perspective or some kind of ratio perspective. I know these are being discussed for TC1, but I'm just trying to think of what would be, what level of card dependence are we comfortable with accepting before these commercial areas get rezoned? Could it be like parking shall cover no more than 3/4 of the site or something like that? Something that we'd be comfortable with for the whole city. Just throwing that out there because my suspicion is that as the economy heats up, you're going to get many more development proposals that are, not
30 more
the
seconds.
future we want. So much for being brief. The last thing has to do with parking unbundling, and I don't know the legality of this in Michigan, but just putting some conditions on parking for residential buildings where the developers, for the parking they do include, they may not include the cost of renting a space in with the room rent. And just insisting, I know other cities do this, insisting on a certain minimum amount that they have to charge for residents to park in their parking structures. Thanks so much. Have a great night.
Thank you. If anyone else wishes to provide public comment at this time, you can press *9 on your phone if you've dialed in, or use the raise hand feature at the bottom of your Zoom screen if you joined us through the Zoom meeting. All right, seeing none, let's go on to item 7, the public hearings for the next business meeting. Mr. Leonard, can you walk us through what we have?
Yes, for the next business meeting, which I believe to be on October 19th, we have 3 new public hearings scheduled. One is for 106 North 4th Avenue. It's an addition for City Council approval. This is a proposed building addition of 910 square feet to an existing 5,240 square foot building in the historic district. The second public hearing is 2145 Independence Boulevard. This is for A2 Montessori Child Care Center special exception use for Planning Commission approval. This is a request to allow A2 Montessori Child Care Center for 30 children with 10 teachers at the existing Church of the Good Shepherd. And then the third public hearing is 1525 South State Street, a natural features mitigation for City Planning Commission approval. A 24-inch landmark tree was removed during construction that was indicated to be saved on the plan. They need to present an alternative mitigation under the UDC penalty and will be coming to the Planning Commission for consideration of that mitigation plan.
Very good. Okay, we're on to 8A, which is our unfinished business, and this is the proposed amendments to section 529.6 site plan specific standards in chapter 55 of the Unified Development Code.
Yes, so thank you. I'm promoting Matt, City Planner Matt Kowalski, who is newly shorn and helping on this petition. And so I want to start off with a couple of one mea culpa and just one set the stage of our recommendation. So since you'll recall that we had been working on the a table format for the site plan review thresholds for some time. And the mea culpa is the version that was included in this packet. I stupidly took on some changes to while Matt was out of town. I didn't use the correct version. So a new version has been uploaded to the packet this afternoon. The difference is the newest one is referenced as an October proposed ordinance date. And I just want to be clear, those included a few changes where we had clarified that NA doesn't mean that you're exempt from permits. It just means that you're exempt from site plan. We also had referenced a couple of specific references to the building. And we had previously changed some references from administrative approval to planning manager approval and removing a, I wouldn't say antiquated, but a prior version which referenced a level 3 site plan review, which we're no longer using that terminology. So my apologies, there has been an uploaded version of that. Those are the only changes that have been ones that have been previously discussed and actually presented to you. I was just working off of the wrong table. So that's why both the originally published version and an updated version you will find online in Legistar. Second, the reason that we were postponed last time and the reason that I'm recommending postponement to you today is mostly about stormwater. In large part, I am confident and I feel that the dialogue at the Planning Commission and the ORC leading up to this point, the proposed site plan thresholds I think are in good shape. I like the table format personally. That's ultimately obviously up to the Planning Commission to determine. But as a reminder, one of the reasons that we sort of have paused this is because our stormwater regulations are specifically tied to the site plan review process. It's kind of a unique trigger in our UDC in that we had requirements apply to development based on the process that it was happening as opposed to perhaps the characteristics of the development itself. At that last meeting, you recall we explored some of the different aspects of that. I'm happy to go back into that, but just as a quick reminder, right now the city's code reads that if you are a 1 and 2 family residential property, you are required to do, we often refer to it as a worksheet, but it is calculation of what's called first flush. And that is just that sort of the first detention of the first flush of sort of cleaning out the mechanisms that you have on the site for a rain. That is a rain event designed around a 1-inch rain event. Then apart from 1 and 2 family, our ordinance has a series of thresholds for that require different stormwater management techniques based on the quantity of impervious surface. If you are not 1 and 2 family and you're any other type of development and you are 5,000 square feet of impervious space or less, no stormwater is required in any regard. If you are 5,000 to 10,000 square feet, we require first flush, as I described. If you are 10,000 to 15,000, we require first flush and something called bank full, which is again the detention quantity for the full bank of a storm event based on that nearby capacity. And then if you are over 15,000 square feet of impervious surface, you have to do those things as well as detain for a 1% storm event, or previously that was often referred to as a 100-year storm event. So we discussed that in changing some of our site plan thresholds and the triggers that we had there, we were actually removing some projects from having any site plan requirement, or excuse me, stormwater management measures required as part of them. Since that time, we took your direction from the last meeting, and we have had conversations with the city's with members of public services, and also taken some of the advice that came out of your discussion with a couple of modifications. One of the so the proposed ordinance that's presented to you reflects basically 2 approaches, and would be grateful for your direction as to which of those approaches seems most desirable. The first approach, or option A, I believe in the ordinance, is what I am proposing is a change that is probably most consistent with the city council resolution directing a desire to make projects easier or more cost effective for review. Those proposed changes do a couple of things. They would change the requirement of 3 and 4 residential and pull them into that 1 and 2 family, where regardless of the square footage of impervious surface of a 3 and 4 unit residential structure, it would require first flush stormwater treatment. That would be a change in that if right now that is governed by those other thresholds, that is it under 5,000, nothing required? Is it 5,000 to 10,000? First flush is required. Is it 10,000 greater? Other measures are required. Matt and I did some research this afternoon. 4 recent 4-unit developments all fell within the 5,000 to 10,000 square foot of impervious surface threshold, which means that this option A would not result in any change to the requirements, although it would be happening in a different way. Instead of requiring first flush under the 5,000 square feet of impervious surface, it would simply require first flush through the worksheet. That would be the same for a 3 and 4 unit if it were 15,000 square feet or 20,000 square feet, which seems unlikely, or on the flip side, if it was less than 5,000 square feet. In that circumstance, a 3 and 4 unit would be having to add stormwater infrastructure that is not currently required under our framework today. The option A further makes it clear that it's no longer site plan that is triggering compliance with these standards. It is any development activity or construction activity or impact to natural features. So it also separates the site plan review threshold from the determination of which stormwater standards apply. Rather, it is again would solely be attributed by the type of development that's being proposed. So that is option A. And as I said, I believe option A is consistent with a desire to make things, to frankly not change our stormwater regulations or make them easier. Option B is a proposed option that has come out of conversations with our public services team. One of the, and I think to be clear, some of this is just, once we started delving into this, it warranted that conversation and looking what those standards are. Option B proposes a different approach, whereas it would largely keep the same structure, very similar to option A. It would eliminate site plan as the sole determiner and add permitting or site plan as the trigger for stormwater having to be met. A couple changes there, however, though, is that it would take what is currently a category of development, which is greater than 1 and 2 family, but less than 5,000 square feet. It would now require that first flush to occur for those developments where right now no stormwater is required for those developments. So in those circumstances, it's going to be potentially adding a little bit of infrastructure requirement. I would say incremental. The larger change being proposed is to actually then eliminate the subsequent structure. So at this point, you would only have 2 categories of project when you're regulating by impervious surface. 5,000 and less is first flush. 5,000 and more would be everything. That is, it would require first flush, bankful, and detention for up to a 1% storm event. Whereas now that is only required for those developments that have 15,000 square feet or more. That would also have some benefits potentially, not a guarantee, but potentially with our community rating system at the city. We are one of a few communities in the state, and I'm not going to speculate at the numbers because I'll get it wrong, but we are in the upper echelon of communities in the state of Michigan where our flood insurance rating is beneficial to our property owners, where they get a higher discount than many other communities in the state of Michigan and the country for that matter, because of a variety of stormwater regulations and measures that we take. Advancing and requiring more for these types of developments have the potential to improve that. I acknowledge, and this is a little bit of the conversation we had through the floodplain overlay discussion, I think that would be a perfectly valid policy discussion. I don't feel like that's what the resolution from City Council is directing the Planning Commission to look at as far as small and moderate scale development. And so I really value, I think it's appropriate for us to be looking at that standard if we're going to be looking at it at all. I'm happy, to bring any other expertise to that point or questions that you have. But I think that there's a bit of a, I just think it's a bit of a policy direction that I would value the Planning Commission's perspective on. I think the Planning Commission absolutely values progressive stormwater management. And to do option B would be to be pushing the envelope in that regard. I think in fact, it's going to have some offsetting implications to development, in that you might be transferring obligations of process costs for stormwater management costs, which is also a different benefit for our community as well. Option A is a little bit closer to, and not exactly, but it's closer to just keeping everything the same in the context of eliminating the site plan threshold, adding 3 and 4 unit, and then everything stays the same for impervious surface. 5,000 and less is nothing, 5 to 10, flush, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I think that's a little bit more consistent with that City Council resolution that was driving this analysis. And I value the Planning Commission's feedback and what your sense is of the direction you'd like to explore in that regard. And then the last piece of that is because we are starting to talk about changes to that section of the ordinance, that is one of the reasons that I would like to recommend postponement, because I think it's important that we actually notice. Thus far, public notice has been strictly focused on the site plan thresholds. This interrelationship between these two sections is, I think, important for us to get right. And I think it's important for us to share with the public that we're looking at both of those sections if we are going to make adjustments in that regard. So with that, maybe I'll just give 1 second to Matt to see if there's anything I missed, particularly with the updated table from the version that was originally published.
There was the one little addition about, were you going to cover regarding the sustainability options for the site
Thank you so
planning?
much. Yeah, I sort of glossed over that. Also, totally unrelated, similarly unrelated to what the City Council resolution is I've added a provision for your consideration about electrified and solar renewable energy projects. And it is what I think is a fairly simple, perhaps elegant way to incent projects that are fully electrified with no natural gas connection and with 60% of their rooftop covered with solar renewable energy or an equivalent if it's better on site somewhere. In those cases, any project that would normally require Planning Commission review would change to Planning Manager review. And then a last piece that I just wanted to highlight that has been in the draft previously, but I just want to make sure it's being called out. I am also, from the council resolution direction of trying to simplify the process, you'll note that after the table, there are standards and process determinations about how those different levels approve site plans. Planning Manager does not require a public hearing. It's an administrative process. I have replicated that language in the Planning Commission stanza as well. The result as drafted would be that Planning Commission site plans are an administrative process, also not through a public hearing process. City Council, those petitions are still going to be petitions that are associated with a legislative action. And so I wanted to highlight that. You've seen it in the language before. I don't know that we've spent much time discussing it. I think it is faithful to easing the process for projects, but it might be going a little far because it's going to potentially apply to projects beyond small and modest projects. So I just wanted to make sure that that has been highlighted for the Commission as well. And thanks for the note on electrification as well. So with that, happy to answer any questions of the Commission after or before the public hearing.
All right, we'll have the public hearing and then we'll open this up for discussion. This is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about the proposed site plan ordinance amendments. If you wish to address the Planning Commission on this item, please press *9 if you've dialed in, or use the raised hand feature if you've joined us through Zoom. For phone access, again, the phone number tonight is 877-853-5247, and our meeting ID is 977-6634-1226. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand, calling on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number or your name if you've joined through Zoom. And you'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. Please move to a quiet area and mute any background sounds so that we can hear you clearly. Please do state your name and address at the beginning of your comments. And I see a hand up.
Mr. Darren McKinnon, you can unmute yourself and address the Planning Commission.
Hi, good evening. My name is Darren McKinnon with First Martin. I was a member, I guess I still am a member of the advisory work group that was put together as part of this process, and appreciate you giving me a chance to speak quickly tonight. I will say that I'm mostly happy with all the proposed changes we've been working through this for quite a long time now. The single biggest item from a cost standpoint that I see as an obstacle to most projects is the stormwater. It's significant in cost, and if you think back to where this kind of directive from council came from, in my opinion, was we've got these buildings that perhaps modest improvements can be made, but they're not being made because some of the regulations make them, cost prohibitive. Stormwater is at the top of the list of the things that make projects small, modest projects cost prohibitive. So I'm a little concerned, especially with the option B, which actually makes it harder and therefore more expensive. So I understand Mr. Leonard saying postpone, and I understand how this conversation with city staff probably went where it got to that, but that's clearly the opposite of the goal of this. On option A, I guess it's a step in the right direction for certain projects, but I would say if there's a way to ever so slightly, I realize there's a strong desire to not open it up too much, allow for projects beyond 3 and 4 family residential to have whatever would be deemed tolerable for first flush retention only and nothing beyond that. I realize there's, very difficult as to where you draw that line, but I think that there's an opportunity there to allow some projects that are commercial in nature to move forward, which would then provide an ability to do some increase in stormwater. Because if you've got these old buildings, there's no stormwater detention right now. So you go from nothing to something, which I think is a benefit to the community. And if it's only first flush, it could actually be accomplished at a low cost. If you get beyond that, these standards that Brent was mentioning, they become extremely expensive, and it just very quickly, the project gets shelved. So thank you. Everything else looks great, and appreciate all your work on this.
Thank you.
Caller with the phone number ending with 134. Caller with the phone number ending with 134. You have 3 minutes to address the Planning Commission.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard and Chair Mills. This is Ken Garber, 28 Haverhill Court. I apologize, I haven't been following the many discussions on this topic. I just looked today at this for the first time. So I'm coming in completely cold with 3 questions. The first is about the last entry in table 529-1, which Mr. Leonard just told you about, his new change for electrified developments with 60% rooftop solar, putting them in category M or planning manager approval. If I heard him right, these projects would not go through planning commission review. Now, we of course want to incentivize building solar and electrification. Many of you have heard me talk ad nauseum about this topic. But what about large and complex projects? I think of Valhalla Glen and Lockwood Senior Living, major developments with hundreds of units, both fully electrified. Granted, neither had enough solar to qualify for this new category, and both originally came in with gas heating, so they would have gone through commission review regardless. But if they had started out all electric with 60% rooftop solar, under this ordinance change, it sounds like they would have been exempt from commission review and approval. I liked both these projects, but they benefited from going through planning commission, and the neighbors deserve to be heard at the public hearings. As we see more large electrified and solarized projects, they shouldn't be able to skirt commission review. Maybe I'm misreading this, but I'm happy to be set straight if so, but I think I heard Mr. Leonard correctly. Also, not all building electrification is good electrification. For example, electric resistant heating, whether in the form of baseboard heaters, wall heaters, or electric radiant heat, is very inefficient. Same for the PTAC units you see in hotel rooms. These are basically individual air conditioners that can heat the room when you reverse the flow. We don't want to encourage these forms of building electrification. Also, electric reheat systems may be the single most inefficient HVAC system type around. So not all electrification is good. So I question this change to begin with, but if you do end up keeping it, at least specify geothermal heat pump, air source heat pump, or VRF system. My second question is about Section B, approval procedures. Under Planning Commission approval, if I'm reading this right, there's a change that eliminates the public hearing requirement when Planning Commission reviews a site plan. If so, this is a bad idea too. Finally, am I right that these amendments eliminate City Council review of site plans where the petitioner does not request a rezoning, and that the Planning Commission vote would be final for these site plans? If so, I'm conflicted about that. But I'm out of time, so thank you.
Thank you very much. If anyone else wishes to provide a public comment, during this opportunity, you can press *9 on your phone, or you can use the raised hand feature in Zoom. All right, seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and read the motion. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission postpones further discussion and consideration of the proposed site plan amendments until the November 2nd, 2021 Planning Commission meeting. Moved by Commissioner Hammerschmidt, seconded by Commissioner Dish. We're in discussion, and I assume that it's fine to not just discuss postponing it, but anything else that has come up. Mr. Leonard?
That's my intention. Yeah.
Okay, great. Anybody want to kick off conversation or questions? Go ahead, Commissioner Gibrandel.
Could we start with the questions that Mr. Wilbur just addressed so that we can make sure those are kind of clarified and out of the way? It's my understanding that the two developments that he brought up, Valhalla and Lockwood, both required rezonings. And with those rezonings, therefore, would not fall in this category. Am I correct about that?
Yes, that's correct. So those two petitions, because they required legislative action, they would still need to go through the process. I think his other questions were accurate reviews. As I mentioned, the text on the Planning Commission process is proposed to change it to be more focused and administrative. It would still be you as a body, but it would not be a public hearing. And generally, yes, I think it's an accurate read. What this proposes is absent corresponding legislative action, site plans would be approved by the Commission.
I would also, though, add, I think this is correct, that it doesn't exempt them from staff review, which is still extremely robust. So am I right about that?
Yeah, it's, just as a reminder, whether staff, the Planning Commission, or the City Council are approving a site plan, all are bound by the same ordinance criteria for determination whether or not that is approved or denied. So it is absolutely the same criteria.
So in other words, you may qualify for this. You still go through a robust staff review. You're just getting approved by you or by somebody, the planning manager or whatever, rather than having the public hearing and going through Planning Commission, correct? I mean, I guess I just want to make that
That's
distinction for the caller, because, I I know going through planning commission, I think this is an interesting incentivization, and going through planning commission is no small thing too, but the staff review is a lot of the lion's share of the work of going through the system in my own experience of it. That's what kind of can happen over and over and over and over again. And it doesn't mean that you're not tabled at planning commission or denied or, whatever it is too. But I just want to make it really clear that everybody has to have staff review, no matter what the project. So it all still has somebody going through it with a fine tooth comb. So I think that's
correct.
really important to point out, that it's not like it's a free for all and you don't get any review. So, so in terms of the stormwater, so if like there's a project I worked on where, somebody wanted to add, 250 square feet of something to their building, but it was a public building, actually, not owned by the city, but a public building. So would they still be required to do stormwater because they're not just 3 and 4 bedroom, like a residential unit? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so it's a good question. None of the changes that we are proposing here would change. So the city relies upon the Washtenaw County Water Resources Commission stormwater rules and design standards.
Right.
Inherent in that is a mechanism that is apropos to your example, where if you are doing a modest addition to a site, while the site might determine what you have to do from an impervious surface perspective, if it is less than 50% disturbance of that area, you don't have to extend those standards across the entire site. And so what we're talking about here would not change that. So what that would mean in that circumstance is that I think you said 250 square foot addition, that would be calculated into that would go into the calculation of what standard is going to apply. Currently, is it 1 or 2 family? If it's not, then we go to the 5,000, 10,000, 15,000 thresholds. Based on the addition of that and the balance of impervious space on the site, that's going to determine the category, but then the standards are going to apply to only that portion that you are disturbing if it's a small amount of the site. The flip side of that is if you are disturbing greater than 50% of that site and it's determined that you have to provide everything, you will be expected to meet that standard for the entirety of the site.
Okay, so it's not just the kind of 3 to 4 bedroom thing. It's just a little bit more complicated than that.
Yeah, and that's and we're not. And
yeah, you're not changing the big picture with that. Yeah.
Yeah, and the regulations are still the same. We don't impact those. We're still pointing to them at the county.
Right.
It's just when we want to invoke them.
Okay. Okay.
It's really hard for me answering stormwater questions coming.
You're doing great though. Geez, you've probably gotten up to speed on all kinds of things in the last couple of months. It's a little strange to me that you can have an impervious area under 5,000 square feet and not do any stormwater, yet we still, if you build a shed that's 250 feet and you're in a single family residence, you're doing stormwater.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a weird sort of exception in our code.
And that's with anything, not just the downtown.
That's so we have other standards in the downtown
Right.
where we provide different because of the land limitations.
Landlocked, yeah, right.
But yes, the short is it applies anywhere. So if you are building a 4,800 square foot duplex, a duplex with 4,800 square feet of impervious surface, you are going to provide first flush. If you're building a convenience store that has 4,800 square feet of impervious surface, you are exempt from storm.
Okay. It's just tricky because that feels like a big gaping hole to me. But I also understand the intent of not trying to keep this streamlined. It's a hole in our code. I would also just say that I get it that stormwater is expensive. I totally understand that. The first flush rain garden approach is not that expensive. It's just not, compared to the other stuff that, like, the having to do, bankful and 100-year and having needing a standpipe with, metered, like, it's just a whole different deal. So it takes up space, but it's just not that crazy expensive either to do that. If we're allowed to do that, kind of fill it up, and when it gets filled up, then it spills out into some safe place, essentially. So I guess that's part of maybe what we consider too. If it's more than that and we have to follow all the county standards, then it's a whole different ballgame. So I guess I just kind of want to put that out there. So these are just my initial thoughts right now. So I'd just be curious to hear what other people have to say too.
Anyone else want to follow Commissioner Gibb Randall? Go ahead, Commissioner Dish.
I am confused. So we learned the distinction between detention and retention last time. And the paper with the new requirements on it uses all the language of detention. Is that simply conflating detention and retention, or does it really mean detention, which is to say you keep it for a while and you gradually release it?
I'm going to pull up the code. I think our code references detention.
So,
Matt's going to actually pull up the code.
Yeah, well, and the memo that you've written says detention. But so what we talked about last time in the meeting was that 3 to 4 family development be required to do retention with rain gardens to the first flush standard.
Yeah, I think the first flush is the most important aspect of that versus retention, detention terminology. I know they are different, but I think the important item is that it's designed to accommodate the volume of the first flush.
Okay.
Can I come in here just for a second? Because I might be able to explain this. So, because you say if it's less than 5,000 square feet of impervious, would add first flush requirements, which is essentially what you're saying, Commissioner Dish. It's first flush retention requirements. But once they go up, then you start getting into the more robust system with the standpipe and the restricted outlet, and that's where a lot of the cost comes in. So that's the detention requirements are a lot more expensive than the retention requirements, and they're just not using, in my understanding of this, they're not using the word retention with the first flush system. That's my understanding.
Right, that would be correct. So it is retention, exactly as Commissioner Gibb Randall just referenced. Retention for the first flush. It says retention infiltration, which would ideally be the goal between those. And then as well as with between the 10,000 to 15,000, again, a retention infiltration. But as we get larger, that's a much larger volume to retain. So there is that detention that's referenced above for the 1% or the 100-year storm is referenced as a detention system. Retention of first flush. Yep, exactly. It says retention of infiltration of first flush, detention of bankful, and 100-year storm events.
And I would just suggest, I think that the question's great, and I think part of this is making sure we're giving you the information and an understanding. I want to be clear though, unless you want to go down that road, I am not proposing that we change sort of the building blocks of different ways to address stormwater on sites. We have these defined in the county, and the question is, which of our sites do we want to link to which one of those tools? And so I think it's important to understand those distinctions, but I just want to be clear. I'm not proposing changes from the county standards of when it's retention or when it is detention, relying on them for that expertise. I think for our question here, I really do think it's more about, as you go from nothing, of course, to first flush, to bank full, to 1% storm event, you're talking about volumes of water. Meeting the design standards of those for our question is, right now, we make those connections in a certain way, which by changing some of our site plan thresholds, it necessitates us reconsidering some of those, I think, from just a usability of the UDC. So I just want to be clear. I'm not proposing that we change first flush from retention to detention or anything. My apologies if I'm using the terminology wrong, but the volume calculation and again, linking those approaches is more important than us. I don't think it's appropriate for us to try to sit here and design what the appropriate system is.
I'm not asking for that. I think
Okay.
the memo is a bit difficult to follow, honestly.
Okay.
Because it references it references existing in the option A, it references existing requirements, which I had to look back in my previous notes to figure out what they were, although you say them below in option B. Anyway, it's extremely hard to follow. But so I get it. So first, when you're talking about first flush, you really just mean infiltration, retention. That's great. And that's the worksheet option that we talked about. And most multifamily projects already have first flush for 5 to 10, and we're adding it for 0 to 5, which seems smart. So but so I think that so what I would like to know is how consequential. So we're adding something at a range that we're adding something for commercial and multifamily from 0 to 5,000, or just multifamily.
So that's the question.
Okay.
I mean, that's kind of the question, is that this analysis has daylighted. I mean, I don't want to say it's daylighted. Staff has always been aware of this. There is a segment of development now that doesn't require any stormwater.
Mm-hmm.
So on top of that, because we want to change potentially what types of development require which site plans, and the way our stormwater is triggered by that, we have to figure out the right way to fix those connections.
Mm-hmm.
And so option A maintains a gap for anything over 1 to 4 family resident. So it pulls 3 and 4 into 1 and 2. So we're now treating 1 to 4 the same as we've traditionally treated 1 to 2. It maintains the gap for other projects that have 5,000 square feet or less, and it maintains the increasing structure as you get larger. For 4 units, again, just based on 4 project examples that we looked at about over the last 6 years, it would have no impact to those, because previously they would have fallen under the first flush 5,000 to 10,000. Now they'd fall under the first flush under that 1 through 4 family.
Mm-hmm.
So that is option A. Option B is instead of taking 3 to 4 families into that 1 and 2, it's take anything that's 5,000 square feet or of impervious surface into that category. So 1 and 2 family residentials and anything else that has less than 5,000 square feet of impervious surface all becomes first flush. So that's taking a category of development into that category. It's not, I can't tell you right now off the bat how many that is. I don't think it's a lot of development activity that is less than 5,000 square feet. But it would be taking potentially a bigger, it's filling that category. But then option B goes further than to eliminate the sort of incremental structure. And so maybe the question is, maybe an approach is, and maybe I'm hearing this from the commission, is sort of a hybrid, that you actually would like that less than 5,000 addressed, but maybe not so far as to bring everything, all of the stormwater mechanisms into every project above it. So sort of keep the hybrid, but plug the hole at a first flush level. Maybe that's what I'm hearing.
Maybe. What option A and option B seem really difficult to compare to me because of, but I don't know how consequential it is in option A to eliminate detention of bankful for 10 to 15 and eliminate bankful and detention of 1% storm event for multifamily over 15 square feet. I don't know how many developments fall into that. So on the one hand, option A becomes a lot, it's stricter for multifamily between 0 and 5,000. It leaves the gap for commercial. Most multifamily fall into 5 to 10,000 anyway, so the stricter probably doesn't make any difference. And so the significant thing there is leaving the gap for the commercial. But then for stuff that's super big, it eliminates what it seems like we need, because we have 85% of our construction in the city that was constructed without detention, and we're saying go ahead and make new construction without detention. So I am confused by what A is doing.
I'm sorry, and this is
me.
First of all, I'm sorry. This is why we wanted to have your feedback, because I just want to make sure this is clear. Right? I think it's really important that we get this right and everybody understands. But I want to be clear. A doesn't change the existing framework. So A is not going to increase. A is largely not going to increase the rate at which we realize stormwater management in our community beyond the rate we're getting it now. So large projects are still going to be subject to that. Slightly smaller projects in the 10 to 15 are still going to have to do more than first flush, but not the full, not detention. We are still going to get first flush for 5,000 to 10,000 square feet. So we still have a gap in less than 5,000. So I want to be clear. Option A doesn't give a pass to larger projects from stormwater management investment. It doesn't plug a hole.
Yeah, I think if I could, I think maybe part of the confusion also, I think because of how we wrote the bullet point there, because one of the bullet points, it says if greater than 15,000 square feet, it'll limit, but those are meant to apply strictly to the example above, the 3 or 4 unit. So I think as it was written, like we had a 3 or 4 unit project, that was the example. And then if that 3 or 4 unit project was greater than 15,000 square feet, it would only require first flush. But so that those like bullet points were only meant to point to that 3 or 4 example. So I think that that's kind of part of the confusion. I believe maybe Commissioner Dish, you see that and you thought like greater than 15,000. No, so that was only meant for like a 3 or 4 unit project. Right now, if it came in today, if it had 25,000 square feet, it would have to of impervious, which again would probably be very unlikely for a 4 unit building. But if it did, it would be required first flush bankful, and 1% or 100-year. But under option A, then the revision, it would only require, because we're taking out site plan, it would only require first flush. And I think one other thing that I wanted to add too, which I think might help make some of the difference too, is that, so again, taking a 3 or 4 unit, as Brett and I looked at those examples, that they're all less than 10,000 square feet. So that right now they've triggered first flush. So obviously those are typically smaller sites, more compact, as you guys know very well. I mean, these are typically R4C site zone sites. So under option A, again, that would, you get the same option A right here, you get the exact same stormwater. Under option B, they would then be required to do first flush, bankful, and 100-year. So that's kind of that difference. They would then, so then again, you start getting into, and you look at those sites, that's not only retention, but that's detention. And that's clearly where on these sites with 4 units, you'd have to go underground. And I mean, as I think we all know, that drives up the cost significantly. So that's maybe one way also kind of look at it, is that 3-4 unit, 5,000 as on option A, no change. But on at least the 4 that we looked at, and under option B, they would then be required to do even more than they are now. So bankful as well as 100-year. So I don't know, I hope that clarifies it a little bit.
Yeah, I think that does. So in other words, these, there are very few, if any, 3 and 4 family units on a footprint of 10 to 15, let alone bigger than 15 square feet.
Correct.
These are just dumb regulations that we had in the books, which we're taking off. I mean, I shouldn't say dumb, but
they
yeah.
apply to everything else too,
Yeah.
right? We're sort of pulling 3 and 4 out of that. They're still going to apply to everything else.
Yeah. Okay.
Just for details, the numbers of the 4 we pulled, 1300 South Main game day condos, that was about 7,300 square feet of impervious surface. Davis Row, which was a series of townhomes on Davis, not right at the corner, but a couple properties in. Yeah, that was just over 5,000. It was 5,056 square feet. A 4 unit on Hill, 143 Hill, was 5,551 square feet, and 542 North Main was a 4 unit that was 8,560 square feet. So when we're, they do range, but they all fell in that 5,000 to 10,000 square foot category.
While we're talking about the stormwater stuff, Commissioner Dish, do you have more? Okay. I saw this in the staff report, and I want to make sure that I understand that this is the distinction. In comparing the language, I think I'm seeing this too. In option B, this is also changing the trigger to be a grading permit, not the development, which seems to me, based on the nods that I'm getting, like that's going to capture a lot more things. Is that potential that you would need a grading permit and not go through any of these site plan processes now?
Yeah, I think both option A and option B accomplish that. Option B requires a grading permit specifically, which would include a lot more activity. For example, that would include maybe just redoing a parking lot that doesn't require site plan. You're just redoing a parking lot where you're maybe milling it. That could potentially require a grading permit. I don't want to speak for that. Option A, and frankly, these are just approaches crafted by 2 different people. Option A just says for any development or construction activity. So what that's going to mean is anytime you're doing something that requires a permit, whether it's a grading permit or a building permit. So both of those are adding a much broader application of these standards than the former when site plan is required. I think the question is a good one. I don't know if it should be limited to grading permit or it should be any permit. That's something I might look at based on the direction, but in both cases, that is the intention, to say it's no longer just site plan. Whenever you're doing something that meets these requirements, that meets these physical attributes, you are subject to these stormwater management requirements.
Got it. I think that so my inclination is to go with option A. If the goal of this exercise of like these revisions that we're doing right now is to reduce costs for smaller improvements, I think that option A is truer to that. option B, at the same time, I think it would be, while we have unearthed this and there is a suggestion, floating this by Environmental Commission, which was like what I read in the staff report as the intention of like this length of delay. I think forwarding this to them to say like, this is not, you guys should talk about it and bring it to us if this is something that we should, or city council, if this is something that we need to that we want to change later. But for right now, I think that option A seems truer to the scope. And so
I guess I would suggest it just a little bit differently. You've been directed as the Planning Commission to do this work for that purpose. And I think that any changes here, that's where that language came from. I agree. I think it warrants that commission's perspective, but I think that's a little bit different than a more open-ended conversation. I think it is, I just think it's good practice for us to share with them how we intend to answer this question that council's asked of us. That's quite different from how do you want to change the stormwater regulations? And so I guess I would respectfully suggest that based on the direction we get from you, what we share with them is, this is the direction that Planning Commission has directed staff to go in. This is the impact it's going to have or not have on stormwater. Help us take your feedback along with the Planning Commissions to the City Council for that decision.
Got it. That's helpful for me. I didn't quite understand like what you wanted from us and to bring to them. I think option A seems truer to what we're doing. But when we come back, what this question has raised for me is by taking site plan away and knowing that there's like other permit activities, how many projects are we do we have some sense of how many projects have these other permits going on that this will trigger? Because again, if they're minor enough right now to not require site planning, I don't want to inadvertently be capturing them in the future, right?
Yeah, I think I don't have that answer for you. I think you deserve that answer before you take action. I think that some of that is built into the regulations, that when you're not disturbing a lot of the area, this isn't going to come into play. When you're not adding impervious surface, it's not going to come into play. So, but we'll answer that. I think that's a good point to make sure that by pulling it away from site plan, it's not having the opposite impact.
Commissioner Gibrandl, I have a couple more things on my list, but if yours is, since you know about this area, if you're okay. The other things that I have aren't, are not about the stormwater options. So one is, I really appreciate you mentioning the public hearings and like pointing out that change. I did not pick up that change previously. Before I put in my 2 cents, I want to ask if there's no more public hearing associated with coming before Planning Commission for a site plan where we are the final body, is there notice provided? Will there be the postcard sent to the neighbors?
No.
I'm not comfortable then removing that personally. I think that I recognize like that people can come and talk to us about anything, but I would actually prefer here, like I think that feedback is, I think that change, while it doesn't apply to the rezonings, this change applies to a whole lot of projects. And I'm not comfortable yet going to the point of that. I don't think that was the intention, honestly, when we talked about this. Like removing public, that part of it, I don't think is a necessary aspect. I don't think sending the postcards adds that much to development. So if we can add that back in, that would be my preference. And then the third, and people can respond to that too, like react, because that's just my vote. The third part is about the electrification and sustainability elements. And I think that's awesome. Thank you. We talked about this in one of our work sessions about what it is that we can, and like, how can we be contributing what's in our goal? I think that this is a fantastic way to say, how can we limit projects? Like, what are the impacts? In terms of what the threshold is, how much was this voted, vetted with OSI?
So not at all. It comes out of city policy documents. So we have, the sustainability framework talks about renewable energy, expanding renewable energy. The 60% threshold is something that we've talked about before as it relates to sort of a balance of providing some space for access, mechanical equipment on a roof. And the electrification just seemed consistent with that. The ideal companion to solar is that it's driving as much of the energy usage of the building as possible. So, unrelated to the sustainability framework, other council policies do talk about that as a goal, as getting toward more electrification, looking for other ways to provide accessibility to other electrical sources to our community at large. So I think it's consistent with that, but in short, I have not discussed it in detail with them. I honestly don't think there's a right or wrong there, but I think it has to be a reasonableness of, is it viable and is it beneficial enough to maybe provide that benefit?
So
and just one more thing to be clear, in that same discussion as we're talking about with public hearings, if that happens, it's also going to have that impact where it's no longer going to go to planning commission. It's not going to have a public hearing. It's not going to have notification. So it won't have citizen participation because administratively approved don't. So I just want to highlight that to the extent that we're changing that provision goes back, then that would have implications to those categories of projects as well.
So one, I would like OSI to weigh in specifically on the language around electrification.
Okay.
To see if there are things that could be electrified that we actually like. I mean, the idea of no natural gas hookup, like, cool, but do we want to put stipulations on the means by which folks are heating? I don't know. I think that that's a good question, and because that language is not. I would imagine that many of our planning documents don't get into that level of detail. Like, I would like them to weigh in on that. But I also think weighing in on all of these things, like, that means no notification to the surrounding properties, right? I think that I'd like their take on it, and as much as I'm excited about this, like, honestly, when I saw it, I was super excited to see, like, this might be an opportunity. I worry a little bit, but this is where I saw other hands go up. So I welcome input on this, of putting this in with a packet, in a change that was really intended to do one thing, and we're now doing another. And I'm not so worried about, like, it being, well, first of all, I think making that known is important, but also, like, this would be a big deal. Like, I think that this could be a really big deal for our ability to move forward and to do things incentivizing. And my guess is that it's going to get a little bit lost, personally. So I love the idea of it, and that we would know how to do it, but I welcome others' thoughts. And I also, I want to give a little bit more thought to whether, if it is a fully electric building and it does have lots of solar on it, is that the check that you need to have Mr. Leonard sign off on it? Or do we want notice given to neighbors, an opportunity for our discussion of it? I don't know yet. I haven't formed an opinion, but that would be a change. And I think that's an important part that we're talking about. So that's my list. Commissioner Gibb-Randall, and then Commissioner Clark, and then Commissioner Weich.
back to the stormwater piece, I would say, based on what you were saying before, Mr. Leonard, about trending towards option A, but I would be interested in plugging the hole. And the numbers that you gave us, some of them were just barely over 5,000, you know, so it's not like they were all like way easily over that. And again, that first flush is not that difficult, really, in terms of cost. And so that's the direction that I would give you in terms of moving forward, because I think it's kind of an odd gap that we require people who build a, you know, single family to build a patio have to do something, and then if you're building, you know, that just seems a little odd to me. And then the other piece that I think is what the, you know, caller had brought up on what Commissioner Mills is talking about is this whole kind of idea of like bad electric, you know, and that my guess is that we probably can't get too prescriptive, because first of all, it's like, you know, technology is going to change too. Like we put something in there and it's going to shift. Or it has to be this system, and, you know, ordinances are like really, as you all know, big deal to change. So, but this is where I think perhaps some guidance from the Office of Sustainability, maybe they could help us with this, because yeah, it would be kind of crappy and missing the point if we just get a bunch of really inefficient electric, you know, because of that. In terms of the public piece, that I hadn't really thought about that, Chair Mills. I mean, like prior to this too. And so that is tricky. It is part of what adds time and cost too. In fact, the scheduling for the public participation, like for the citizens participation thing, like that adds a lot of time, you know, to the project too, because you have to notice it, you have it, you know, so I'm not saying one way or the other which way I think it has to go, but it is part of how to make it leaner in terms of getting through the system more quickly. So yeah, I'm not sure how I feel about that either.
Go ahead, Commissioner Clark.
So I had a question for Brett about, can you hear me okay?
Just barely.
Okay. So my question is about what happens with the things that are on planning manager review when they get denied. Is the next step for the developer to just immediately go to like a lawsuit, or would they go to have some avenue to go to like planning commissioner council with that denial to try and make their case? Just curious about that.
Yeah, currently the way the UDC is structured, there is no sort of internal appeal process for site plan at any level, whether it's staff, planning commission, or city council. So they would have the same sort of rights to avail to them within legal action, or of course, but to be clear, we spend a lot of time with petitions, both at the administrative level and at your level at city council, trying to get to compliance. So, but the short of it is whatever approval authority, currently the way the UDC is structured, we don't provide any additional appeal structure to that.
And can you still hear me? I just changed my microphone. Okay, cool. So my other question was about the electrification, and just it's more of a comment, just following along with the caller that talked about, you know, how some systems can be more energy intensive, especially since we're in a cold climate when those overdrive systems kick on. The heat, you know, the certain lower end systems can get really expensive very quickly in the lowest temperatures. That's not to say that I don't think it's a good goal, but I just think that consulting the Office of Sustainability or whoever else may be of use would be a really good idea. And then also I want to just be mindful that we don't incentivize if we're doing multifamily developments and the tenants are responsible for paying the utility bills, and a building is built with really poor insulation, low R score, the building envelope isn't sealed, and there's these backup electric heating systems that kick on as soon as it gets cold, that we're not saddling renters with incredibly high utility bills. And that's just something we need to be mindful of.
Commissioner Weich.
So two things maybe to start. One is on the stormwater between option A and option B. Is it possible when that comes back to the commission, it could be presented in a table? Because it's hard to scan and comprehend the information and hold it to compare. So for me, just visually, I would benefit from a table presentation. And then if there could be some explanation for how the gap, well, something around how the gap got created in the code that we've been referencing between residential and commercial. So is it intentional that someone decide to create this gap? And our undoing of it has an unintended consequence downstream? Or is this just something that because we are now evaluating it, we have daylighted this gap? So any background or additional information around the gap I would benefit from as I come up to speed on the stormwater. I also wonder, so still inside the stormwater, if we would be open to splitting these decisions up and that we would conclude the work on the site plan. And then that would give us time to do the stormwater. I know they are related, so I know that some things kind of trigger the site review or site plan review, but I just wonder, does it actually make sense to keep both of these in lockstep as we move forward, just so that we can get an approval for the site plan revisions that Commission has been working on for some time moved along, which I think might benefit the community as we figure out the stormwater. So those are like 3 requests. They don't have to be dealt with today. And if you review the third one and say, no, let's keep them in lockstep, I won't protest. And then on the electrification, I wondered if there was a justification, if you have an answer today, if not, if it could be in a memo for why it would stop at the planning manager and not stop at the planning commission. And so that way it would skip a city council step. So when I first sort of thought about this, I thought one incentive would be for a developer, because of the time that is involved of going through staff review and then getting a staff recommendation to go to commission. If then they have to go to council, that adds time and money, but we could stop at planning commission, which would then allow for the public hearings and community input, but would not require the council component and could be an incentive for developers. So I imagined you considered that and made a decision for why you made the recommendation you did. And if you are willing to share that, I would love to understand that either now or in a memo. And then I have one more question, but I will pause in the event you want to respond now.
Sure. So as to where that sort of 5,000 or less came from, I don't know. I'll try to find that out. I'll speculate.
No, I'm sorry. Oh yeah, I didn't.
Yeah.
You don't have to answer that. It was
Yeah.
just the electrification one. If you want to answer that one now, but
Um,
you're a human being, so you get to answer what you like. Sorry.
No, I'll give you that information on the background about where it came. I speculate it was just that at the time we didn't have a lot of stormwater regulations, and by adding them, there was some sense of moderating it for small and modest projects, and so we built in additional standards for larger projects. So that's probably, but I'm speculating. I'll try to get you some more.
I would back that. I was here when that was 20, I was here. That's exactly why, when we came up with that structure, I wasn't directly involved with it, but that was exactly why. The 5,000, it was kind of like smaller projects. It wasn't as, and then like then after, and at that time, there was nothing for single or 2 family. So that's why there's that apparent gap, because then later, many years later, we realized, well, the majority of our these things are single or 2 family are the major contributors, well, not the major, but one of them to the stormwater. So that was added after. So that's exactly why that gap exists, because we tried to facilitate smaller projects with 5,000. And then we realized those single family, and I think it was, and I don't know why we as a city didn't go back and open up that 5,000 for other, but the single family and two family was added after. So that's why. So, sorry.
Thank you, Matt. And then as far as electrification, the reason that that's there is keep in mind that this proposed site plan thresholds already takes a large category of site plans from city council to planning commission. So this proposed framework would take any permitted use site plans that don't require a rezoning or legislative action, and they would automatically move to planning commission. And again, the philosophy of that is that both the planning commission and city council are complying with the same criteria of standards. The reason that I propose adding that in from a planning commission down to planning manager was frankly from the challenges that we face from a incentive base versus a regulatory base. And so that's why it got placed where it did. Conversely, I think you could explore not making that change for site plans to move generally from city council to planning commission, and maybe that is an incentive tool to accomplish that. But that's why it got put there, because the majority of them have already been moved under this proposal. And I was looking for, even in that category, what would be the ways to incent more sustainable development consistent with the sustainability framework and other companies.
Thank you. And then the question around that, so it would staff be open to density being added to that threshold? So if we hit a certain density level plus electrification plus solar, that it sits at the planning manager sort of level, or is that something we would discuss at a working session to sort of negotiate that? Because I agree with the previous commissioner's comments around maybe getting a benchmark from OSI on electrification and solar, so that that's the threshold we're looking at, as opposed to just the electrification. So they're, like now that they're going to move through these benchmarking of buildings and it's going to be focused on energy efficiency, that part of that could be, if they hit this threshold, then it can come over to the planning manager as opposed to coming to the commission. So just like density is also one of those thresholds that I in particular am interested in. Like, we had I don't know if I can talk about developments that are still before the commission. I mean, we're before the commission. Can I talk about them?
Yeah, no.
The Toll House one, it's like, it's on a site where it could go to 147 units, but they're only proposing 57. But if they had proposed 147 with electrification and rooftop solar, would that fit being able to be approved in your threshold? And they could see that as an incentive because they don't have to come to this multi-step process of their first reading and then their revisions and then their second. And then that gets us as a community something that we value. So the 820 goals get hit, but more housing stock also gets hit. And so then there's that twin incentive that's already built in.
We could look at it. I think my initial thought is it of course has to still happen within the context of the UDC. So you couldn't be deviating from the densities that are already provided there. Mm-hmm. So it would have to be sort of a subdividing of those, but it's something we could explore.
Okay. And then I have just one final question, which I would love to take offline just for the sake of time, which is the caller reference Valhalla and Lockwood. I went back and looked at the first memo from staff for Valhalla, and I recognized that it was asking for a zoning change, I think from R4 something to R1. Okay, right. Yeah, so they were moving around with it, and staff denied the first two and then approved the second two. And I just wonder if you could take developments, just two, to give me an example of how those sites that may have been, I guess, let me go at it a different way. The thing I am concerned about is the denial at the planning manager level, where the commission would have disagreed with the planning manager, whether that planning manager is you or someone who follows you. And given that our UDC does not have an appeals process, which I heard you answer and understand, I just have a pause on that. And I would like to try to answer my internal question of what are the potential unintended consequences with this incentive. And I don't have a good rubric to begin to answer that question. And I feel like staff, you would be able to say, it would hit this, but not that. And you would be able to say that more quickly than I can do the research. So if that's not too much staff time to help me with that, I would appreciate it. And I'm happy to do my own labor if you just point me to sites where you say it would be this one, it would be not this one, it would be this one, not that one.
Yeah, we can definitely follow up and have that conversation with you. But to be clear, in that case, that was a legislative decision.
Yes, I know. I recognize that.
Yeah, but that's really significant because a site plan doesn't have discretion. A site plan is measuring a proposal against standards. And I don't want to say that, I have to measure it against the same standards. You as the commission have to measure it against the same standards. And that example there that you're talking about, that was a difference of opinion that staff had and the planning commission had on a legislative decision. Our opinion on applying the standards once that legislative decision is made is the same. Those are the same standards that we're evaluating with it. So, but that's a really important distinction. But yes, I'm absolutely happy to talk that through, and we can come up with some other examples where there has been a divergence of opinion, maybe on site plans between a staff perspective and planning commission. Not a lot of them are coming to mind to me right now, but I'm happy to have that discussion.
No, I don't presume that there are. What I'm trying to anticipate is the unintended consequence of changing where that decision is made as an incentive. And so I can think of some, but I don't know that they make sense. So what I'd like to first do is hear some from you, and then I can put that through my own rubric and say, okay, my concerns are not valid, and we can move on. And I think that's pretty quick, but I actually don't know how much labor it's going to cost. So I want to acknowledge that. Thanks so much.
Commissioner Clark.
I want to throw out there another quick point. Just like I've been hearing a lot about talk about benchmarks, and my first reaction is enthusiastic about benchmarks being a really promising area, especially for like tenant consumer protection. I know that's kind of out of our lane right now, but so I think that's great. But I want to just put a word of caution in incorporating any thresholds into decision making from our view as a body, because those thresholds often might incentivize the landlord or developer to influence the behavior of their tenants in ways that are not exactly socially, like if you have a tenant that's struggling with mental health issues or something like that, or just things happen and they might be leaving a window open while having their heat going, and that might not reflect accurately the building's capability, but rather the usage. And the potential for landlords, having worked for a housing first organization that avoided evictions, this was something that came up, was tenants not necessarily maintaining their apartments in ways that were the most energy efficient ways. And then those scores reflecting poorly on housing for populations that may struggle more with keeping their housing running as it was intended to, could potentially incentivize landlords to increase evictions of tenants or find reasons and ways to evict people that are difficult or that aren't efficient tenants just because to protect their building score. So I just want to be mindful of that in the discussion. And I know it's a bit outside of our lane, but just as far as planning standards go, I think that thresholds could be opening a lot of doors once we start talking about that. It might be a longer conversation.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt, and then Commissioner Dish.
Oops, sorry.
Similarly to Commissioner Mills, I appreciate you calling out the eliminating the public hearing thing. I also don't think I'm comfortable with that. I maybe would like to understand more the rationale behind it at some point. Doesn't have to be now, but I think it's really helpful to hear from the public. And I think I understand the like trying to streamline, but this sort of relates to the electrification and solar incentive too. I think that it's important for people to know what's happening adjacent to their homes. And so on that electrification and solar piece, like, again, I understand the intent, but I don't know if I'm super comfortable like taking that away from coming or like using that as a way to make potentially major projects not come before planning commission. I also think we offer some good suggestions to developers outside of just electrification and solar. So I think like my opinion on that is like, I don't right now support it. I don't think. That was a lot of stormwater conversation that I like mostly followed, but I agree with Commissioner Gibrandal in that like closing the gap. So if there is like a hybrid something between A and B. And then I feel like I harp on this every time, but those NAs in that table, there's still some NAs that like just aren't, it's not the like that it doesn't require a site plan. It's like literally that is not compatible. But if you just want to leave them as NA, one of the NAs is capitalized and the rest of them are all lowercase, and that is driving me nuts. So at the very least, just like make that one lowercase. I think that's it. Fix the NAs, thanks.
Commissioner Dish.
Yeah, so I have one question for Commissioner Mills and Commissioner Hammerschmidt, because honestly, I was distracted for a minute, Commissioner Mills, when you brought up your concern about the elimination of public hearing. And is it, where exactly on the table are you worried? Which categories that would lose a public hearing are you worried about? Is it only specific to the electrification incentive, or were there other shifts to require M instead of P that you're worried about?
In particular, there could be site plans that are, already zoned appropriately for, 1,500 or not 1,500, we don't see 1,500 units, but 150 units, that my reading of this is that they would not, if it doesn't require rezoning, our shifting is that it comes to us now. Is that right, Mr. Leonard?
Yeah.
So to have, I think that it's important, but at the same time, it's a change. And I do think that there is some benefit in letting neighbors know what's going on. And in neighbors' ideas for things that we might ask for, because that happens, and sometimes we bring up things that actually don't cost a whole lot, but that people think about, but we're not in that neighborhood. That's among the reasons that I think having for those situations, I think it warrants still having public hearings. To be clear, we already recognize that there's a whole bunch of M's on this table. That's Mr. Leonard. Doesn't actually stand for Mr. Leonard. It stands for planning manager. And we know that would not have public hearings, but that's moving a decent amount of, things that right now, like the buck stops with us to him, and things that are smaller. And I am supportive of that and recognize that there are things on the table that pertains to. So new construction of residential buildings up to 5 and 6 dwelling units. Like that's one of the things that there won't be a public hearing on anymore. And I'm not proposing changing that. Yeah,
So that's where I'm asking for specification. So the specific area that really concerns you is new construction, that part of the table. And you're not worried about the 5 and 6. Sorry, yeah. But you might be worried about the 7+ dwelling units that might come in with electrification and then be exempt. That's, for example, one.
well, right now, as written, 5 to 7, or 7 units that would come in as written without electrification, there would be no public hearing. And there would be no notice.
Wait, no, it says P there, doesn't it?
But this was the distinction that Mr. Leonard brought to our attention today, which was that
On page
it's treated
9.
as it. What's that?
Sorry, it's on page 9. It's like it's not in the table.
It's not in the
text.
table. It's right after the table.
If I'm reading this correctly, and maybe I'm not, I think it's that anything now that comes to us where it's like the buck stops with us would not require a public hearing.
And along with that, that was my point of clarification. Along with that, along the way, there would be no meeting with neighbors ahead of time, but also not even just meeting with neighbors. It's that there's no notice that something was being proposed in their neighborhood.
Yep. Okay. I'm sorry. Could you? I don't have page numbers on mine. So
along this, if you look along this, I guess I was.
Yeah, on the you mean in the top guy. So okay, wait a minute. Could we just read this? I'm so sorry. We were up so long last night, and I'm clearly not in the best shape. So I get what you're saying. Yeah. So is it planning for development?
It's the comment box, Commissioner Dish, on its comment LB2.
Yes, I see it. Okay.
Which I hadn't seen previously. So this is why I appreciated it commented out and brought up.
Okay. 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 Gee. Yeah, well, I'm with you on that. Okay. I thought, yeah. So why would that take away the public hearing? And then so could we just talk a little bit more about why that's true, and is there any flexibility there? And yeah, all right. So I mean, I think we need to talk about that more. And then so I'm still trying to figure out that A and B options here. I'm worried that Yeah, so if we make a hybrid of A and B in the way that you guys are thinking about, it's going to add cost to smaller developments. So it will, in fact, then both options, not just B significantly against the mandate from council, because it takes a large group of developments, the ones that are between 5 and 10, and it adds detention to them. And that could be a disincentive for infill project. Am I making a correct leap there? Like infill.
It would be adding more expectations of sites greater than 5,000 square feet of impervious surface.
And those sites, am I correct in thinking that infill is often at that point? if we're,
Yeah, by way of example of those recent 4 units, those are instances of 4-unit residential infill in our community that are all in the 5,000 to 10,000 square foot range.
yeah, right. So, and I'm not being anti-stormwater, I'm really pro-stormwater, but these are trade-offs. We're talking about trade-offs, and I think we want to air them in the most honest way possible so that when we make a choice, we know what we're making. So
couldn't agree more.
yeah, so I'm totally okay. But in any case, yeah. So, okay, so could you walk us through currently when Planning Commission approves a site plan, it goes to council. Is the reason we have a public hearing because it's going to go to council? I mean, why is taking the going to council part, which I thoroughly support as a best practice? I do not want these to go to council, but why does removing that step mean that there's no longer a public hearing?
So it doesn't have to. Just as a reminder from where we started, we regulate private development through state law. State law enables us to do that. State law says that site plan review is an administrative process. We put ordinances in place that we measure a site plan to say it meets this or it doesn't meet that. If the answer to all of those questions that we pose and the answer to all of them are yes, the site plan is approved. That is the same process, whether I do that in my office or City Council does that after a public hearing at Planning Commission and a public hearing at City Council, notified to 300, every property owner within 300 feet and 2,000 emails. So it is the same standard. So in our ordinance, historically, we as the city have said, despite not having to, we are going to hold public hearings for this administrative process. And so in approaching this language to the point of trying to make things easier for small and modest projects, eliminating that step would simplify the process to an extent, not substantially, but to an extent. Public hearings do bring information and they do add notification requirements, and they do add, frankly, an uncertainty to a staff determination of, or the Planning Commission determination of those standards being met or not being met. And so this change here says, let's do how we do planning manager approval and apply it to Planning Commission as it is drafted in our current ordinance, and it could continue to be. It is whether it's City Council or Planning Commission, we want to hold a public hearing, even though that's not required by law. We want to add that to our process. And so from the lens of trying to make it simpler, I went the other direction with this change. To be clear, there are both large and small and modest projects then that would be impacted by that. There would be small and modest projects that don't have to go through that process. There would also be large projects of 150 units that are really zoned would not go through that process. So I think the discussion is good, and that's why I thought it was really important to highlight. But the short answer is we can keep it as it is based on a city policy that we want to add more process than the minimum required. I'm not saying that's bad, but that's a policy decision we want to make. And so that's where this change came from, though. From me, probably weighing more a faithfulness to how do we make the process easier, and this would be a way to make it easier. It's not a right or wrong, like you said, there are trade-offs.
So can I try another line of argument on this, which is the rationale for not forwarding site plan approval to council is exactly as you said, because it's an administrative decision and it's a best practice not to not to create the impression that there can be judgment call, negotiation over an administrative decision. That's a bad impression to create. And that's why, that is the rationale for the big change that which is, if it's a site plan approval, if it's by right, it doesn't go to council. So essentially what you've done, and you're expressing it in terms of simplicity, but actually what you've done is you're being consistent. And you're saying, if it's an administrative decision, it's an administrative decision with respect to planning, just like it's an administrative decision with respect to council. So in the council end, it means we don't send it to council. Council sets legislation and policy. It doesn't do administrative decisions. So then at the level of planning, to be consistent, we should treat administrative decisions like administrative decisions. I think that's a strong argument. I also think that there might be an argument for saying, at some degree of density, an administrative decision, it might be useful to have some feedback at the planning commission level, not at council, from the neighborhood. I can see there's an intuition on the part of Commissioner Mills and others that a certain size of project, it might be useful to keep these public hearings that are not required. From your perspective, and possibly from mine as well, because the simplicity part doesn't work for me, but the consistency part, if it's an administrative decision one place, it's an administrative decision in the other. That works a little better for me. So possibly from your and my perspective, it really doesn't matter the size. This is the nature, we're talking about the nature of a kind of decision. And when you have a public hearing, you are saying what you say matters and can change this project. Well, it should be able to. So, or maybe it should, right? So, I mean, I saw your head cock, and I'm open to having this discussion about whether, I'm totally open to having this discussion about whether there's been something good and useful and Arbor exceptionalist about inviting more public participation, but we'd want to talk about, would that just then be all projects at planning? Or would it be a certain size of project at planning? And how do we justify that? So I hope that was not completely unhelpful in thinking through the resistance to the removal of the public hearing.
I think that's a great exercise in it. I think a way to add an example is, the public hearing cannot impact the standards. The public hearing can't say, you can't have 10 people say, the ordinance says that you can do 10 units here, but I think it should only be 6. The ordinance makes that decision. I think the way a public hearing can be beneficial is through the rubric of staff giving the planning commission that staff report. It's conceivable that some information is brought to the commission's attention that wasn't put forth through the process by review to that point. I think we hear more, frankly, about standards and thoughts generally about outcome than we do missing information or incorrect information. But I would say that that's an argument why public hearings for this administrative decision can be valuable. Maybe there's some bit of information that's presented that didn't come out of the process that is relevant to the criteria. But at the end of the day, those criteria are evaluated, and you're absolutely right. An administrative decision is the same whether it's happening in my office, at your table, or at the city council table.
I'm gonna just chime in here quickly because to the point of like, what is the line? In my look at the table, and this is why having this as a table is really helpful. Unless we're talking about a private street or construction of a residential building in a mixed use district, we're not seeing anything that is less than 7 units. So that's the only thing that comes before us. Everything else is going to planning manager. Or if it's rezoning, then we are seeing them on their way to city council. So we're really only talking about things that are at least of the size of 7 units, or that they're some other use. That there's a lot of things that are some other use that are also in our purview too. So maybe that's the wrong level. We could continue to do that. I see both. I also see that. Like, if there's not tons of discretion, I get that. It's not necessarily the public hearing part. I think it's just the that there's development, that there are changes, and if suddenly the bulldozers show up, right? Because I think that could actually lead to some more pushback that was not the intention of changing this personally. Commissioner Clark and then Commissioner Abrams.
I was going to ask, I know that the postcards that get sent out to all the neighbors, they can add kind of this unknown variable, and it's a whole process on the developer perspective, especially for small developments. I'm wondering if there is a way to do, instead of like public engagement, but incentivize early stage developer like charrettes, community charrettes, because I do think that the public engagement provides a useful opportunity to sensitize people to what's going to happen in their neighborhood and can give the developers an opportunity to diffuse tension. I'm a little bit hesitant to say, on one hand, it's great that we can reduce expenses on smaller developments, and it is a really cumbersome process on a smaller project to go through the postcard notification, all that. On the other hand, I am concerned that if we only have public hearings for larger developments, then the public understanding of the current development situation in the city is going to be that only all these big developments are getting passed, and they're never hearing about the more like mid-scale, like human scale, smaller developments. Or for example, if we bypass the public process with the sustainable developments, people won't know that those developments are happening, and then they'll see that the only thing that we're hearing about are these bad developments. So finding a way, if there was a way to do some kind of a light, especially now that we're in the COVID era of digital everything, like virtual meetings for some, and then others require an in-person. But one of the big things with those note cards going out to the neighbors and all of that from a developer standpoint was the timeline that if you have to do subsidized paperwork, you have to make sure that those are through the system by a certain day, and you have to get your documentation that you held that meeting and you have those notes. Well, if those postcards get delayed and they're not in your 2-week time frame or whatever the requirement is, your entire project is thrown off its schedule. And that comes with a lot of like different subsidies and stuff that require all those processes and boxes to be checked. So it would be really beneficial to make that process as straightforward and clear cut as possible, and maybe framing it less as like a combative interaction, but more of like an informational charrette and engagement. I enjoy those sessions. I think they're great for getting people to maybe understand details and show intention behind developments. And like Commissioner Mills just said, it can be very startling when the bulldozers just show up, and there might be things that the developers don't know, that maybe the neighborhood used to have flooding issues with the site, and they're annoyed and very concerned that their houses are going to flood, and they can easily diffuse that with, hey, no, we're actually putting in this system. So that's kind of my thoughts. It's a complicated one, and there's benefits and drawbacks.
Commissioner Abrams, and then I just looked at the time and realized that we've talked a long time on something that we're going to postpone.
I'll be quick. I wonder, just 2 quick things. One is, I wonder if we can think about this in phases as opposed to an all or nothing. So I think it would be possible to take a small step and prepare ourselves to take another step. I think it's easier to remove the public hearing than it is to add it back. So maybe we think about that. And then the second question I had, I wondered, is the is the format of the physical postcard, is that illegal? Is that regulated by law? Would it ever be possible to switch to email or transition over time? Because I think that would be cheaper and faster and would maybe cut back some of the cost and time constraints of the notification.
If there's anything else, Commissioner Mills, to your point, maybe I could do a quick recap, and maybe I'll even address some of the questions. So generally, I'm hearing support for postponement, but an urgency that we've been working at this, and you want to see this move forward. So I am hearing some pressure to make sure I'm giving you as good a product as we can at that November 4th meeting. We will consult with OSI on that electrification language, although I have to say that I think I'm leaning towards removal of it. The conversation about the public hearing maintenance at Planning Commission level suggests to me, as it was maybe brought up before, that this warrants a larger conversation than maybe shoehorning it into this particular one. It's not to say it's not an idea worth pursuing, but I wonder if we've got enough to tackle in this context. I do think that it's important that these are not bifurcated, that the stormwater aspect and the site plan review thresholds go in concert, unless you are comfortable with the site plan thresholds going forward, knowing that there's going to be a lot of projects that don't have stormwater at all in that interim. I don't think that that's probably a goal that we want. So that's why I think it's important to keep them going. I am hearing, the one thing that I am not hearing a lot of consistency of, but I'm going to propose an approach to fill the gap of stormwater facilities of 5,000 less, from the standpoint that it's infrastructure that's critically needed in the city. If we keep it modest at a first flush approach, it should be able to be accomplished in a relatively cost-effective manner. And we will also explore sort of presenting, maybe even tablifying it, like to Commissioner Weitch's suggestion, and as I am quick to do with a lot of other aspects of the UDC, that seems to resonate with the Planning Commission as a great way to display information. Maybe we even look at that whole section as a way to present that in a little bit more understandable way. And we'll work to address Commissioner Hammerschmidt's editorial eye. And as it relates to the public hearing, I guess I'm generally hearing that this is perhaps going a little bit too far afield from the direction of City Council resolution. So again, I'm hearing some different voices on it. So at a minimum, I think when it comes back to you, I will present a recommendation, but I will have some alternative language at the ready should the commission want to explore that further. I am reluctant to delve into much changes with our citizen participation requirements. That's its intention, is to notify residents early in the process. Those deadlines can be really burdensome to a project, but they are also designed to be measurable so that we can assure that some of that information is going out on a timely basis. And frankly, it requires some space. It doesn't require a petitioner to respond, but it requires some period of reflection based on that conversation to see if they want to make adjustments to their proposal. I think that's less genuous if that conversation happens and then they're just submitting their application the next day. I'm not saying that they always take advantage of that, but at least building in the space, we're probably going as far as we can to lead them to that water to maybe respond to some of those questions. To the point about noticing, I can explore that. I know that that's something that's been discussed in a lot of ways at the state level. We also have some charter issues. I don't know specifically if those relate to notices, but I think that there has been discussion about allowing electronic notices. I don't think it's allowed by state law yet, but I'm speculating, so I will follow up on that too. And that's what I'm hearing as maybe a product to come back to you. Anything major I missed or mischaracterized or misread the room on? Great.
Thank you very much for keeping track and recapping. I realized that what I read was that we would postpone this to November 2nd, but that is election day. So it's actually November 4th. It's a Thursday.
Yeah,
we're
sorry,
meeting.
my typo.
No, you corrected it when you just said that, which is why I noticed that. So I read the motion before, effectively reminding us what I said an hour and a half ago, which is that we're going to postpone this until the 4th of
Thursday, November 4th. Yeah.
And all in favor of the postponement, just raise your hand or say yes. That is all of the hands. So the motion carries. I just got a notice that I need to go find my laptop plug. So, and it's also 10 after 9. Can we take a 5-minute break? And then we'll come back and do regular business. order. So this is item 9A, the 3874 Research Park Drive site plan for city council approval. And we'll start with the petitioner's presentation. You'll have up to 10 minutes, folks. And then Mr. Kowalski can offer comments and the staff's presentation, and then we'll open it for the public hearing.
Sorry, my bad. Mr. Chang will be the city planner presenting this petition this evening.
Oh, okay, very good. Mr. Covert, we're ready for you whenever you want to start.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody. My name's Tom Covert. I'm with Midwestern Consulting. It's great to be here with you tonight to review the 3874 Research Park Drive site plan. It's formally known as, or also known as, the Vanguard project, but we'll be referring to it here tonight as the Sartorius site plan. You will see that in this next slide that we have a long list of folks here that make up the stakeholders team from the development side of the project. In the interest of time, I'll assure you that all these folks are here on the call tonight and available to assist and answer questions should you have them as they come up with regard to the site plan. And with that, I'm going to ask that Mary Lavin, is she, Brett, did you promote her?
I have not seen Ms. Lavin.
All right, so I'm going to.
We have a caller.
Yeah, I was going to say, did she raise her hand?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and promote the caller. And we'll see if that's the right.
Mary, are you able to hear us?
Yes, I am able to hear you.
Yep.
Hi, and thank you. Can you hear me?
Perfect, thank you.
Great. So I cannot see the screen. I'm just on the phone, so I appreciate that you give me the chance to speak for a moment. So I'm the president of Sartorius here in the U.S., and I am a key stakeholder for this project here in Ann Arbor. We're really excited about this opportunity to expand our live cell analysis site there. Just a little bit about Sartorius. Sartorius was founded in 1870. So we have a long history of success both here in Ann Arbor in the US and founded, as I mentioned, in Germany. So we have been continuously operating as a company and also a important community sponsor for the last 150 years. And we're looking forward to being a partner in Ann Arbor and also and being really a community activist for all of the items that you have spoken about tonight. I also have on the line with me Dr. Reinhard Baumhoff. He is specifically here to talk about our corporate responsibility activities to promote sustainability. Reinhard, are you on the line? Are you able to speak?
I think we just moved him in.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep.
Reinhard, would you just like to highlight some of the proactive activities we're doing to ensure that Sartorius is a sustainable company, not just globally, but also specifically in Ann Arbor?
Yes, it's a pleasure to me. So good evening to everyone. So, and greetings from Germany. It's a pleasure to join the meeting. It was so far a very interesting one, but just coming back to the topic here. So what we plan to do here in Ann Arbor, and what the intention for that meeting here is as well, is to build a center of operations as the foundation for our sustainability growth, sustainable growth in North America. As was already mentioned before, sustainability is one of our major targets and objectives in our commercial activities. What will it be about? So you see in that slide here that a multi-purpose site is planned. So the very core of the business in Ann Arbor will be the operations, where we're going to consolidate several businesses which are currently distributed across North America. And what will it be about? Assembly, engineering, and also then the distribution. Since we're a company focusing very much on the biopharmaceutical industry, it will be as well then a center, as planned to be a center of excellence and for reagents. So reagents used to be in life sciences to indicate the status of cells or organisms. Furthermore, it will be as well a repair center for the products we have installed in the US as well, one part and one element of our sustainable strategy or sustainable strategy. Beside that, it's is well product development or an R&D scale-up hub. So we plan to further invest into the today's R&D activities we have in particular already today in Ann Arbor. And to involve our customers into that, it will also include then training a demo center. And this is in particular of interest from the sustainability perspective, since we know, and this is the reports we had a look into, that the major impact when you have a look at the emissions footprint we are involved in as a company is about the product use and the product utilization at the customer site. And so the site in Ann Arbor will be then as well focusing on training in order to help our customers to use their products better, to do that more efficiently with less energy consumptions, reduced and more focused workflows they do. So as a summary, so what we plan to see here is an increase in efficiency and resilience to be closer then to our customers in the North American market, and also then to reduce complexity, for instance, when you think about logistics for the North American market, where that side will play a major role.
Thank you, Reinhardt and Mary. Moving along, context-wise, we are the central properties of the Research Park Drive Industrial Park area. We're located south of 94, east of State Street, north of Ellsworth, and then west of the Ann Arbor Railroad, which you can see here. We are these properties highlighted in green. We're about 16.9 acres zoned office, research, and lab. We have studied the existing conditions of the site. You'll note that we are 5 of the properties in total. We have frontage on Research Park Drive, both on the east and west side of our property. There are some floodplains and wetlands associated with the Mallett's Creek drain that exist along the northern border. There are some landmark trees that were planted with the existing facility and infrastructure that sits there today. That is planned to be raised, the building that is. You'll see in a minute that we're preserving some of these landmark trees. And then utilities exist both in Research Park Drive East and Research Park Drive West, which we plan to connect to. The project itself is a building of about 60,000 square feet of office and 2 stories. So the footprint of the office is 30,000 square feet on each level, and that exists in this area. We have a 70,000 square foot research and development facility, which will be 1 story. We are parking this site with 299 parking spaces. 150 of those meet the EV charging requirements per the code. And then we also park with 64 bike parking spaces. You'll note we have 3 access points. We have 1 to the west here on Research Park Drive, and we have 2 to the east along Research Park Drive for loading, unloading, and fire access. couple of key features to the site are that we are completing a lot of the sidewalk connections that exist. Currently, we'll be putting sidewalk in each frontage along Research Park Drive, and then we'll also be adding sidewalk so that you can get from the site all the way out to State Street where there's public transit and those kinds of things that happen. So we're completing those sidewalk connections. We have a food truck patio on site, a pavilion, some patios from gathering spaces, and then we've preserved the landmark trees here adjacent to the previous development in Research Park Drive. This is just a quick overlay of the site on the aerial that exists, a picture of the aerial of what exists there today. Again, pedestrian scale, we've moved the building up near Research Park Drive. We've completed the sidewalk connection on this side of Research Park Drive to get you out to State Street. And then again, along each of the frontages of the property. Utility service to the site's pretty straightforward. We anticipate having a sanitary lead to Research Park Drive to service the building. We are planning to construct a 12-inch water main in parallel to the 8-inch that exists in Research Park Drive, and then taking that 8-inch offline to meet the current standards of the 12-inch water main service. We also plan to bring a 12-inch water main through the site and connect to the other side of Research Park Drive to complete
1 minute.
I guess it would be fire hydrant access and the ability to fight fires at the site if needed. We have a rain garden, we have stormwater detention in the form of infiltration. Tom, I'm going to turn it over to you here if you want to talk about the building.
Absolutely. Thank you. Tom Phillips, Hobson Black, down the block here at 100 North State Street. Good evening. Commenting about architectural aesthetics. Here you're seeing the south elevation of the building. Actually, that is the east and west below. You want to flip the next one, Tom? And this is the north elevation and south elevation. The south elevation is the building's main entry. We'll go to the next one. So commenting about architectural aesthetics, we work closely with Sartorius to design what we feel is an elegant, modern composition with an envelope composed of insulated metal panels and glass. And the concept is to help convey the dynamic nature of their culture. The high performance glass is designed to shed heat.
It's 10 minutes.
Gotcha. While maximizing daylight illumination. Thank you. We're very proud of it, and we feel it's going to be a cutting edge asset to the community. Thank you. There's also, we have 9,000 square foot of solar panels on the roof, which you'll see on the roof plan. That's a 150 kilowatt system array. And we'll be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, Mr. Chang.
Yes, I'll just follow up. I know they had a lot of information to cover there. So some points that was previously mentioned. Approval is contingent on combining the 5 lots before permits will be issued. They just started to get into the sustainability. They are adding solar panels to the roof. I believe it was 150 kilowatt hours at DC and 125 if it were kilowatt hours at AC, which is the alternating current, which I did have a brief conversation with the Office of Sustainability of how much power that is. It's approximately that would power between 15 to 18 houses yearly. And that all depends again on a typical 2,000 square foot home, depending on, how they're heating and cooling their house. There was also something that came up just today, and it was from the neighbor to the south. That is actually a school. I had listed it in the staff report as office space, but is actually currently used by the Washtenaw Intermediate School District, and that is used for special needs students. They're not opposed to the proposal, but they are concerned with the stormwater detention on site because there are playgrounds in the rear of the site. And I think, if it shows right kind of where the hand is located, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but where the hand is, where they have either a playground or a student garden. So they did have concerns that were brought up regarding the stormwater detention. Because it was brought up so late in the day, I did send an email off to the County Drain Commissioner's office, which has approved this proposal. I do have some questions regarding, that does have infiltration on site. So I'm curious about how much water may be stored in those detention ponds, and if fences are possible to put. They're not required, I know, from the slopes, but it's a discussion that I'm sure that the applicant and the neighbor, they're happy to explore further. It's really more for the safety of the students. I think there's about 40 to 50 students that are out there. So I'll follow up with the County Drain Commissioner's office. And in fact, the petitioner tonight may have more information regarding how much standing water would be in those ponds. Other than that, I think they've mentioned everything. There is electrical vehicle parking on site, and I'm open to any questions you may have.
All right, very good. Before we get to those questions, we will have the public hearing for this item. So this is an opportunity for persons to speak for up to 3 minutes about the proposed 3874 Research Park Drive site plan. If you wish to address the Planning Commission on this item, please press *9 if you've dialed in, or use the raised hand feature if you've joined through Zoom. For phone access, if you're watching us right now, you can call 877-853-5247, and then you can enter our meeting ID, which is 977-6634-1226. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand. Again, you do that by pressing *9 on your phone. When you are promoted to speak, please move to a quiet area and mute any television or background sounds so that we can hear you clearly. And please state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
Caller with the phone number ending with 134. Caller with the phone number ending with 134. You have 3 minutes to address the commission.
Thank you, Mr. Leonard and Chair Mills. This is Ken Garber, again, 28 Haverhill Court. As a science reporter covering biopharma, I commend the petitioner for providing modern lab space to Sartorius and other life science companies, and for its commitment to Ann Arbor. This is a good developer, but there are some problems here. The solar array covers only 9% of the flat roof area. The 150 kilowatt hour output, by my calculation, will provide only 4% of the building's electricity demand. That's based on DOE estimates of commercial electric usage per square foot. I realize the petitioner can add more later, but it would be nice to see a bigger investment up front. And gas heating for new construction is just unacceptable in 2021. We just can't lock in CO2 emissions for the next half century. Come on, Mr. McCausland, Mr. Vig, Mr. Phillips, put in a geothermal system. You have the land area. But there's a larger problem beyond this building. Emissions have to stop. Buildings like this perfectly evoke the cognitive dissonance of the strange times that we live in. We know we must quit fossil fuels, but we can't help ourselves. This petitioner talks a good sustainability game with the building envelope insulation, the high performance glass, the LED lighting. But let's look at emissions. Referring to the US EIA Commercial Building Energy Consumption Guide and DTE's current energy mix, I calculate that this building will emit about 696 metric tons CO2 equivalent emissions per year from electricity consumption alone. Now add gas combustion emissions, which I estimated 572 metric tons CO2 a year for heating. The total 1,268 metric ton CO2 equivalent emissions a year. That's a tangible 0.3% addition to the city's current overall commercial emissions at a time when we're desperate to lower those emissions. Of course, this project meets our zoning code and you have to approve it as is. I get that, but let's not call it sustainable. Now, what about future petitions? Your zoning code options are limited to incentives for planned projects. We can't require solar or heat pumps, much less zero emission buildings. And conventional wisdom says forget the building code too, because State Act 230 supposedly keeps us from exceeding the state
30
code.
more seconds.
I think that's wrong and that we can have our own code, but that's another discussion. At least do this. Have staff calculate and report the greenhouse gas emissions of every future development that comes before commission. That way you and council will at least know the climate impact. This idea has been out there, but let's implement it. Thank you.
Thank you. If anyone else wishes to participate in the public hearing, please press *9 on your phone or use the raised hand feature to raise your hand.
See no indications.
All right, then I'll read the motion. The Ann Arbor City Planning Commission hereby recommends that the mayor and city council approve the 3874 Research Park Drive site plan and development agreement subject to combining lots before issuance of permits. Moved by Commissioner Weich, seconded by Commissioner Gabrandel. Who wants to kick off conversation? Or questions? No one.
Ready for a roll call?
To that end, oh, go ahead, Commissioner Gabrandel. Go ahead.
I think we're kind of in this awkward place of like, this is a whole lot better than we normally get. And then we've been reminded of our kind of like ultimate goals from one of our callers, so, and he also states, where we don't really have wiggle room and things like that. And I don't know if he attended our session several weeks ago where we really sort of got the pretty specific line about where our influence can lie and not. I want to aspire, but I also feel like my hands are tied too. And I also, on one hand, want to commend the developer for what they're doing here, which is a whole lot more than what we usually see. And I think it looks like a great project. It makes me think, with all of those bike parking spaces and things like that, man, we got to get with it with our State Street bike scene, because it's tantalizingly close when you hit the intersection at Eisenhower, and then it all completely falls apart from there over to this area. And I think as a city, we really need to get with the program with I know the State Street corridor has been studied for a lot of years, but we just have to act, because it's just I biked it once and I will never do it again with that overpass. So we really need to figure out how to be able to move people through this area too, so that somebody who works in a place like this, who actually may be partly attracted to a place like this because of all the different sustainability elements, finds that it's actually quite dangerous for them to bike here. Yeah, I'm supportive of everything that you're saying here. I do see that, it is kind of a small solar panel area when you look at the whole roof. I get it that there's other needs that are up there too, but it does seem kind of small in terms of what you could be running from that. So that would be a wish, but I know that, we only have so much influence with this. So at the very least, I would love to see the way that your electric capacity is set up, so that there could be more, not just the roof can handle the structure, but that the way your panels are set up and things like that there's more opportunity for that in the future as well. So that's it for now.
Great. I was going to similarly chime in that I was excited to see this. And I'll be honest, I had this vague recollection of right before COVID having seen something else on this site. And I didn't go back and dig out things and compare. My sense, and maybe this is for the development team, this seems to be utilizing more of the site than previous, or it's a larger building than before. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Great.
The previous project really only utilized about a one parcel and maybe a quarter of the other, where this sprawls into the second parcel, right?
Okay. Well, I for one am excited to see more development here, and I also am excited to see the plan that there is land envisioned for future expansion. I think that all of this is suggesting that this is the beginning of what could come. I'm really excited that you have only provided one more parking space than what our current minimum is. I'm really excited that this will lead to 30 new spaces that have EV chargers installed in them. Also, the connection down the road beyond your property line, am I understanding that right? That you were talking about the sidewalk connecting.
That's
even
correct. We have
beyond.
off-site sidewalk improvement. Yep.
I did some of the like when I saw the development agreement, I was doing the calculations about the solar, and I don't know, the original thing, I thought it was one panel, and knowing that it is 1,000 panels is quite different. I would share Commissioner Gibrandal's hope / expectation that the city intends to be carbon neutral in a decade, and your roof space will be super valuable in helping us get there. And so even if it's not envisioned immediately, making that building so that there can be future expansion of solar would be, I think, a really wise investment. This seems to be like something that you intend to be here for a while. And so I would just encourage you, as you're thinking about future expansion, the opportunities for thinking about ways that you can utilize some of that property for additional, for geothermal heating, looking at the changes in technologies. You're a German company. We have a lot to learn from Germany. Like, this is stuff that I'm imagining you have already deployed there, and hope that you bring it to Ann Arbor and find folks here that, I think the things that you're doing to build this so that people are driving EVs there, that they have an ability to park and charge during the day, and that they can walk there and use the bus, I think is really fantastic. So,
yeah, Commissioner, just to be clear, we've acquired more land than the first option that you saw a couple of years ago, and that's primarily to be able to have future phasing for this project, and ultimately I'm sure that we'll look at additional green energy type opportunities. The real reason why our solar array is really where it's at right now is because we haven't developed the entire footprint interior, but this is a lot of lab space, so we're gonna be incurring a lot of rooftop units. We just don't think we could fit it, to be perfectly honest, by the time that the amount of mechanical gets up on this roof, to be able to really have anything greater than what we're anticipating with the solar array that we're suggesting.
that context is really helpful. And although it is not a requirement, seeing this within the development agreement, this is what caught my eye, that like the expectation that there will be solar panels on this site is within their development agreement, I think is great. And that you would use that as the floor, not the ceiling, I think is exciting. So.
For sure. Thank you.
Commissioner Clark, go ahead.
So yeah, I just want to echo similar sentiments. Looking forward to seeing this be built. I'm especially excited about the commitment to sidewalks. That's awesome. So, and I just had one small question out of curiosity, and was just wondering if bike parking will be provided, or even electric bike parking. But yep, other than that, thank you for bringing this forward.
I don't know if we have plenty of bike parking. I don't know about electric bike parking specifically. I'm not sure what that entails, even as far as the charging capability or what's needed there. I think the one thing that we try to emphasize with this project, not unlike our last petition that we had for the previous iteration of the site, is that we are trying to keep people in a walkable community that is somewhat self-contained. So if you really delve into our site plan, it's a little difficult with the limited time we had, but we do have, not unlike the previous version, we do have a spot for food trucks. We have outdoor spaces for employees. Now we can circulate through the entire park, which will be beneficial for the entire tenancy of the park, which is, a 60-year forlorn area, as I think we all know. In addition to that, the walkability aspect to the new hotels that are out on State Street, and the retail and the restaurants was a big attraction, for Sartorius to choose this site, for their consolidation here in Ann Arbor. So, it's meant to keep a lot of people very proximal to the site and not to dump out onto State Street, as we tried to do with the previous project. So I think we're accomplishing that. And, with the acreage that we have there, we could, ultimately, the plan is obviously to have that further growth here at this location. And, we envision at least probably a doubling of the site, if not more. So this, and in addition, this is generating, a substantial amount of new, very high-paying jobs for the area as well. So it's a huge benefit to our community that, to keep a tenant, an occupant of a building like this in our community. It's a big boost for us.
Mr. Covert, did you
Yep.
raise your hand?
If I could, real quickly, with regard to bike parking spaces, we have basically 3 different areas where we're proposing for bike parking. We're proposing 2 areas near the main entrance for a total of 14 bike parking spaces out by the main entrance. And then over by the what we're envisioning as the employee entrance, we have 18 bike parking spaces. So those are in real close proximity to the building. So if there were the notion to electrify those, it would be something that could be done relatively easily, because they are located near the entries where people are going to be using them. So that was something that we had thought about with the design.
Commissioner Clark, go ahead.
Really quick, I was just hoping you could point out on the map just where the food truck area is going to be, because that does sound really exciting too. I'm just curious.
Yep. So this is the layout plan, and then the food truck patio is here. It's kind of this gray shaded darker area with a connection to a pavilion area, and then outdoor patio and seating areas.
Great. Other planning commissioners? Oh, and there's even closer up. Commissioner Hammerschmidt.
I'll just confirm, and I agree with everything that's been said. I think this project looks fantastic, aesthetically and everything. What Mr. Chang brought up about the comment that he received today from the school, I just wanted to, I guess, verify with the petitioner that they're going to be working to address any of those concerns that they have in terms of potential flooding or water infiltration into their site.
Yeah, I've already indicated to Tom Covert, and we'll reach out to the neighbor. Actually, it wouldn't be flooding, which would be the concern. In fact, this site has no stormwater at all on it currently. So what we're doing is a vast improvement to the area. But we'll definitely meet with them to make sure there, any concerns that they may have, for safety, especially during the construction period, that we would meet, any concerns of theirs. There's clearly there is some activity going on there. It's a conditional use, the school there. So it's we are obviously, we fit within the zoning. They're sort of shoehorned in there, but I think that there's no question we would want to be, careful with what's going on, obviously with activities there. But I think as far as from the standing water perspective, that's something we will take into consideration.
Great, thanks. And yes, extra thanks for the sidewalk connections. I think that's going to vastly improve this area. So thanks.
Any other questions or comments? if I can, Mr. Covert, if you could just stop screen sharing so that I can see people's faces a little bit better. Thank you very much while we vote. Mr. Leonard, can we have a roll call vote? Oh, wait, Commissioner Gibrandal's going to sneak in. Go for it, Commissioner Gibrandal.
Just one other little thing, when you're pointing out the patio area, I know this isn't required, but you might consider adding a few trees, because that is just a big, huge paved zone with a whole lot of nothing in terms of shade. And I just think it would be much more comfortable for people to hang out in that area if you were able to integrate some shade and trees in through there. Again, probably not required. So that would just be out of your own kind of concern for your employees, and making that a space that feels hospitable to them, because otherwise they're in the middle of a lot of pavement.
For sure. Well, and that's somewhat planned. It's probably not really representative of what you're looking at, for sure.
Sure.
All right. Any others before Mr. Leonard does the roll call vote? Mr. Leonard, please.
Commissioner Abrams,
Yes.
Commissioner Hammerschmidt,
Yes.
Commissioner Dish, I see a yes.
Yes. Sorry, I couldn't unmute.
Commissioner Clark,
Yes.
Commissioner Weich,
Yes.
Commissioner Mills,
Yes.
Commissioner Gibrandal.
Yes.
Motion carries unanimously. Proceed to City Council.
Thanks, folks, and thanks for, you didn't have much of a choice, but for sticking around for our last conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, we are on to item 10 now, which is another opportunity for public participation. Persons may speak for up to 3 minutes about any item of interest. If you wish to address the Planning Commission at this time and you've dialed in, please press *9 on your telephone to raise your hand. Or if you're watching us through the Zoom link, you can use the raised hand feature. For phone access, you can call 877-853-5247, and our meeting ID is 977-6634-1226. City staff will select callers that have raised their hand, calling on you by the last 3 digits of your telephone number or by your name. You'll hear an automated announcement that the host is allowing you to speak. Please move to a quiet area and mute any background sounds so that we can hear you clearly. And please also state your name and address at the beginning of your comments.
Mr. Garber, you can unmute your phone using *6 and address the Planning Commission.
Oh, but there we go.
There you go.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, Ken Garber again. You've heard a lot from me tonight, so I'll be brief. On the question of public hearings for site plans that fall to Planning Commission to decide, I'm surprised it's even a discussion. The public has to be able to weigh in on these projects, and we should encourage that participation. Remember that this change would apply to projects big as well as small. Granted, I come from a neighborhood organizing background, not from a professional planning background, so of course, this is my view. But I see public hearings as central to the democratic process and also critical for making developments better. I don't think that any significant project can be adequately reviewed and modified and approved without public input. That's all I have to say. Thanks to everyone for your hard work, and have a good night.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to participate in the public comment opportunity? If so, push the raised hand, use the raise hand feature. Seeing none, we'll move on to item 11, which is commission proposed business. Commissioner Gibrandal, you still have your hand up. I assume it's not for commission proposed business, but is there any commissioner who does have commission proposed business that they'd like to bring to us tonight? I don't, surprisingly. All right, then we'll move on to 12, which is adjournment. May I have a commissioner move that? Moved by Commissioner White, seconded by Commissioner Gibrandl. All in favor, please say aye or raise a hand. That's everybody's hands and a thumb from Commissioner Dish. Have a great night, folks. We'll see you next week.